Before Hulkamania, before WrestleMania, before promos full of catchphrases and foam-flecked rage, there was Verne Gagne. A quiet, polite, iron-fisted tyrant in a turtleneck. If Vince McMahon was the warlord who conquered wrestling, Verne was the control freak who tried to preserve it, with chokeholds and silent grudge lists. This isn't about Verne's in-ring work or how he trained stars, or how he ran the AWA into the ground like it owed him money. This is about these men Verne Gagne genuinely hated. Not storyline heat, not business disputes. Real, career-ending animosity. He didn't throw chairs or scream in hallways. He just ended you politely. A handshake at the airport followed by a phone call to make sure no one ever booked you again. Wrestling loves its villains. But Verne? Verne was polite, Midwestern malevolence in human form. And the men who defied him? They didn't just leave his territory. They were exiled, and Verne tried to salt the earth behind them. Let's meet the poor suckers who crossed the Minnesota King. You didn't cross him, you slipped up, and suddenly you were nowhere. Verne Gagne wasn't just a promoter, he was a system. He trained you, booked you, paid you, and made sure you didn't forget who built the house. The AWA wasn't a wrestling territory, it was a Midwestern monarchy, and Verne was its balding king with a clipboard, a gold medal, and a grudge that aged like whiskey left out in the snow. On the surface, Minnesota nice, clean-cut, family man. But backstage, Verne had a list of grudges longer than a Billy Robinson wrist lock. And unlike Vince McMahon, who at least screamed when he hated you, Verne just smiled and made a few phone calls. You didn't get fired. You just stopped existing. This man wasn't working with a roster. He ran a loyalty cult. And the minute someone outgrew him, he didn't adapt. He retaliated. Politely, of course. The kind of retaliation where you still get a handshake. Just before you get blackballed from every town with a working ring. And if you think that was just old school thinking, think again. Verne didn't believe in change. He believed in obedience. Talent wasn't meant to shine, it was meant to serve. He'd build you up, only if you let him chain you to the style, the schedule, and the ego of a guy who still thought drop toe holds were the main event. When Hulk Hogan got hot on his own, Verne tried to snatch his merch money. When guys like superstar Billy Graham tried to go off script, even slightly, it was like showing up at a Lutheran potluck with brass knuckles. Verne didn't book angles, he enforced hierarchies. Step out of line, and he didn't need to cut a promo. He just cut you off from opportunity, plain and silent. He didn't lose stars. He choked the oxygen out of their careers if they didn't kiss the ring. And that's why the two men who finally pushed back didn't just leave the AWA. They triggered Verne's most lethal move, total erasure. He looked like a star, talked like a rebel, and Verne wanted him gone yesterday. If Verne was wrestling's version of a strict choir director, then superstar Billy Graham was the guy doing power curls in the choir loft while cutting promos on the church organist. 22-inch pythons, sunglasses indoors, and promos that sounded like a preacher on a caffeine bender. He wasn't just ahead of his time, he was skipping decades. In an industry still built on chinlocks and soft-spoken threats, Graham was Hulkamania before Hulk ever laced yellow boots. And Verne hated every second of it. Verne wanted clean. Verne wanted technical. Superstar Billy Graham was loud, unpredictable, jacked, and flashy. He didn't chain wrestle. He posed. He didn't just work the mic, he melted it. He was box office chaos, and Verne didn't want chaos. He wanted wrist locks. The straw that broke Verne's patience? Graham made it clear he wasn't sticking to the plan. No long-term deal, no dropping belts, no loyalty to the AWA. That was enough. In Verne's world, if you didn't submit, you didn't belong. No matter how loud the crowd was. Superstar wasn't just defiant, he was gone. Graham was gone, just like that. No feud, no fight, no second chance. Verne erased him with the precision of a tax audit, and from that point on, Graham was unofficially unwelcome in the AWA. His name faded from the booking sheets like someone had gone through the records with a black marker and a personal grudge. Superstar would go on to become a legend in the WWF, influencing everyone from Hulk Hogan to Jesse Ventura to Scott Steiner. But he didn't do it with Verne's blessing. He did it despite him. Verne didn't want Billy Graham to be a star, because if he succeeded, it would prove that Verne's version of wrestling was getting old. And spoiler, it was. Verne looked at superstar Billy Graham the way a priest looks at a casino, loud, sinful, and probably contagious. In Verne's mind, Graham was the walking, flexing embodiment of everything wrong with modern wrestling. Too loud, too muscular, too shiny, and too arrogant to wear an amateur singlet. To Verne, Graham wasn't ahead of his time, he was polluting the craft. He turned wrestling into showbiz, and Verne saw that as blasphemy. The robes, the muscles, the rhyming promos. Verne thought it was clown work, something you'd see at a state fair before the pig wrestling. And when Graham refused to bend the knee, that was it. Verne didn't just dislike him, he saw him as a virus, and he wanted him cut out of the business. Graham didn't just break Verne's rules, he spit on them, danced over them, and then cashed a main event paycheck without looking back. He let Hulkamania happen, then tried to leglock it for royalties. Hogan wasn't just Verne's biggest star, he was the one who got away, and Verne never forgave him for it. In the early 80s, Hogan lit up the AWA like a warehouse fire. Crowds were going wild, merch was flying off tables, kids were copying the poses. But there was just one problem. Hogan was getting over without Verne's permission. Verne didn't like that. He didn't like that Hogan wasn't a work rate guy, he didn't like that he couldn't chain wrestle. And he really didn't like that Hogan wasn't cutting Verne in on that sweet Japan money or the t-shirt sales he was stacking under the table. So when Hogan was ready to win the AWA title, when the fans were begging for it, Verne pulled the rug out. Not once, not twice. Over and over. He booked dusty finishes like it was a hobby. Why? Because Verne wanted Hogan to sign over a percentage of his Japan income and merchandise sales in exchange for the belt. Hogan told him to shove it. And when Vince McMahon came calling, offering him the spotlight and the freedom, Hogan jumped ship faster than a babyface in a steel cage. The rest is wrestling history. Hulkamania ran wild, and Verne was left holding the AWA belt like it was a receipt for a business he forgot to modernize. Verne didn't just dislike Hogan, he resented him. To Verne, Hogan was a big orange betrayal in a bandana, the final proof that showmanship had killed sportsmanship. He saw Hogan as the Frankenstein monster he helped create, only to watch it flex its way out the door with all the money. Verne believed Hogan got over for the wrong reasons. Muscles, charisma, catchphrases, everything Verne didn't value. To him, Hogan was a circus act that stole the spotlight from real wrestlers, the kind who actually knew how to take a headlock. And the worst part? Hogan didn't just leave, he thrived without Verne. He went global, he changed the business, and never looked back. That burned Verne deeper than any promo, because in Verne's world, loyalty wasn't optional, it was expected. Hogan broke that rule, and Verne never forgot it. He didn't bury you, he just never booked you again? Let's make things clear, there's only really two people that Verne venomously hated, but there's a list as long as your arm that classes as resented. Not everyone got the full superstar excommunication. Some just got the Midwestern death stare and a polite phone call that never came again. Let's run through the A-list of guys Verne didn't outright hate, but absolutely couldn't stand watching succeed without him. First up, Ric Flair. He trained under Verne, broke in through the legendary Gagne camp. But when Flair ditched the mat wrestling in favor of limousine-riding showbiz, Verne saw it as a betrayal. Flair never got badmouthed, just quietly ignored. Flair was too loud, too shiny, and too NWA. Verne didn't bury Flair. He just made sure nobody said "woo" too loud in the locker room. Then there's Jesse Ventura. The body was a Minnesota boy, Verne's own backyard. But Jesse had a mouth Verne couldn't control, a physique Verne didn't trust, and political ambitions Verne wouldn't touch with a cattle prod. Jesse was never blackballed, he was just politely never welcomed back. To Verne, Jesse was a spotlight thief dressed like a disco ball. Too much glitter, not enough grappling. Dusty Rhodes, never part of Verne's AWA, but he represented everything Verne didn't believe in. Brawls, bravado, and charisma over cardio. Dusty was too southern, too talk-heavy, and too loved by the fans for Verne to ever co-sign. No beef, just a brick wall of disapproval. Dusty cut poetry on a mic. Verne probably filed a noise complaint. And then we got Roddy Piper. A young Roddy did AWA rounds, but Verne never made a real move. Why? Because Piper was chaos. Unpredictable, uncontrollable, magnetic. All the things Verne never trusted. He wasn't political about it. He just didn't invite Piper to the dance. And if you weren't invited by Verne, you didn't get in the building. We can't forget Macho Man Randy Savage. Savage had the wrestling pedigree Verne liked. His dad, Angelo Poffo, was an old-school shooter. But Randy was pure chaos in fringe jackets. The voice, the mannerisms, the over-the-top everything, not Verne's style. He wasn't a technician, he was a cartoon with a death wish. To Verne, Savage was wrestling on Red Bull and glitter glue, a showman in a business suit world. He didn't hate him, he just didn't want him anywhere near his booking sheet. Look, this isn't even the full iceberg. There's a boatload more names you could file under. Verne probably didn't send them a Christmas card. Guys like Ted DiBiase, Harley Race, Terry Funk, all legends, all brilliant, and all probably too loud, southern wild or independent-minded for Verne's Minnesota monastery of matwork. But here's the thing, this category isn't about full-on hatred. It's more like deep, generational disapproval, like your grandpa finding out you bought NFTs. Verne didn't always throw you out the building. Sometimes he just sat there with a clipboard, muttered something about respect, and booked you against a broomstick in Des Moines. In the end, if you were charismatic, colorful, or career-minded outside of his system, you were probably resented, not because you were bad, but because you were proof the game was changing, and Verne didn't want to play. Verne didn't go out with a bang. He went out with a clipboard and a grudge. In the end, all the people he hated, resented, or side-eyed into oblivion, they changed wrestling. Hogan ran wild, Flair wooed worldwide. Graham became the blueprint. And Verne, he clung to his Minnesota snow globe, hoping matte-based realism would somehow outdraw neon bandanas and action figures. This wasn't a man out of touch. It was a man offended by the very idea of touch changing. The real tragedy? Verne could spot talent, build machines, and mold legends, but the second they colored outside his chalk outline, he cut the rope and blamed the tide. So here's to the cold shoulders, the frozen payoffs, and the unreturned phone calls. If wrestling is built on drama, Verne Gagne was the bitter backstage chapter no one was supposed to read. And if you enjoyed this scorched earth walk through Verne's blacklist, hit that like button harder than Verne hit the idea of fun, and subscribe so you don't miss the next time we dig up more buried grudges, broken bookings, and locker room cold wars. Leave a comment with the name Verne probably resented next. Bonus points if he never said it out loud. Thanks for watching.